my weekly video blog. Do you know, it's been remarkable weather recently. It's still very much in flux. You know, last week during the Nidderdale walk it was very, very warm. And I remember that because I was walking through it. However, during the week we had gale force winds on one day and rain either side of that. Today we have had absolutely beautiful weather, I mean really nice weather, and we're set to have really nice weather over the bank holiday as well. And then I'm reliably told it's going to rain. So we're all making the very most of this weather with barbecues and all sorts. This week is a living and learning week, although there isn't much to say really. If you remember rightly, I had started the Prochlorperazine, and one of the things that I did after I did that was I went to Harrogate because I was nearing the end of being at university. I had one more term to go, and it was a very short term in fact. And I went home and I registered with the practice at Harrogate. And one of the doctors that I was lucky enough to get was a woman called Anne Bird. And she has since retired. And she was absolutely fantastic. She said to me that she was uncertain whether there was anything wrong with me. She thought there probably wasn't. As all the other medical people that I had spoken to, by now, you know, about 3 or 4 doctors and 2 eye specialists, including the one that I spoke to you about that we never even finished the eye test. And all of them had told me, I think there were 8 in total, that there was nothing wrong with me. On top of that, I was getting better. The Prochlorperazine was working. And I was beginning to feel absolutely normal again. But I did say, and she said, look, there is one thing that we can do to set your mind at rest. She said, if you're concerned that you've done damage to the inside of your brain, she said, one of the things that we can do is we can put you in for an MRI. Now, on the NHS, this would take forever. She said, you know, we'll send you off to the Harrogate Hospital, but it will take months, possibly. I said, well, you know, I'm feeling better, but just in case, let's do that anyway. So that was how we left it. I have to say that during this process of getting better from that, I had no idea, absolutely no idea, that this ailment would come back. I had no reason to believe that it was a condition that I still had, even though the symptoms had gone away. I was told very clearly by 8 different medical practitioners, both to do with my eyes and the visual distortions, to do with the people that were prescribing me basically anti-sickness medication. They all said, there is nothing wrong with you. And this is very, very important, because I can speak about this in hindsight and say, look, I still had anxiety. In fact, I was still in an anxious phase, you know, and I can look back on that and see that. At the time, I had no idea. And this matters because the next time I move on to a living and learning blog, I will explain exactly why it's very, very important to remember the difference between looking back at something in hindsight and seeing where you were in chronology and living through it at the time, because you can get into rather a lot of trouble if you mention something in hindsight which you spoke about differently at the time, because there are thick people in this world who cannot tell the difference, and even if you try and explain yourself to them, they will have none of it. And believe you me, in the next year and a half, as we go on through this, because I intend to do this Living and Learning blog all the way through until September 2004, you will understand exactly why I'm being like this, and you will probably agree, I hope, with my assessment of the situation. So that was it. I felt better. I have to say that during the process of getting better, I cannot tell you how important my friend Martin Brown was. There were times when I must have been absolutely inconsolable. I mean, sort of confused and on the verge of what must have seemed to him like a bit of a nervous breakdown. And he did absolutely excellently. Because he lived so close to me, unfortunately, it must have been an everyday occurrence to him. I have to say, the other thing that really helped me was something that he introduced to me, and that was the UCB, which is the United Christian Broadcast, word for the day, which was a little sort of reading that I did, and I sort of did that religiously, if you pardon the pun. And that seemed to help as well. So I won't say that during my Annus Horribilis my faith disappeared. Not at all. In fact, I was doing more faith-based things during my Annus Horribilis than I've probably ever done before. So that's an important thing to note. It's also very important to note that despite having been through the first and the second questionings by then, this was not something that I blamed on God at all. This was what I thought, well, up until this point in chronology, had been a serious ailment that I could die from, that the medical people just weren't taking seriously. Now, if we fast forward 10 years to this past week, I've started on the neuralgia treatment, and so far I've been doing the 3 days with the 2 pills a day, and it's made absolutely no difference at all. I'm going to do another 3 days with the two pills a day because I've only done the first block, and you could argue from a scientific point of view that it's not entered my system yet. The good news is there have been almost no side effects at all. I've had one side effect so far, which has been that when I first take the pill, for about an hour after, I do find that it affects my optic nerve, which is probably going to be quite common because it slows down the nerves, and you can get to a situation where you move your head and the picture doesn't move quite as fast. What tends to happen is that the brain will compensate for that after an hour or two, and so that's no big deal to me, but that is a side effect that I've noticed. I've also spent a lot of time thinking about things, and you know, it's about time that we had some acceptance. I'm a strict J. I like pretty rigid timetables, and that's not going to change. Despite the fact that I keep trying, that's not going to change. What I need to do is I need to accept that, and I also need to accept that just because I have a rigid framework doesn't mean that I can't add spontaneity into that. I don't always need to frequent exactly the same places and order exactly the same things on the menu, for example. That's one thing. So there's a balance there to be had, but my problem is that I've tried holistically to change myself from what I am into something that I'm not, and I've got to stop doing that. Secondly, I really do have to get a handle on the 5-year plan, because there are 2 prongs which I should have started by now, which I'm not doing good enough on. Prong 2 and prong 4. I need to really get to grips. I need to really be thinking about my future, and I really need to be thinking about my health. Those are the 2 things that I really, really need to get on with. So that's what I'm going to do. And finally, do you know, I need to start to move on a little bit in terms of relationships, and particularly relationships that are that I find difficult to cope with sort of spiritually. Do you know, I struggle with my same-sex attraction, and the reason I struggle with that is that I do see that, you know, homosexual activity is sinful. I do see that. And there's no real way not to justify that in terms of specific actions. The problem is that I get so het up on that particular sin that I forget that actually most people live sinful lifestyles. Most people lie, most people cheat, most people are having sex outside of marriage, most people are doing things that they shouldn't be doing anyway. And what I forget is that although the world puts a big emphasis on how bad it is from a moral point of view to be homosexual, they don't put the same moral emphasis on everything else. And the one thing that God does very, very simply is he looks at sin, and sin is all the same. So you're either sinful or you're not. It's really as simple as that. The degree of what you do wrong, except for several cases which we don't need to go into, but not any that you'll probably think of if you're secular, are all the same. You know, mass murder will be the same as lying. Thinking about cheating is the same as having committed adultery. To God, it's a bit like it's a bit black and white, it's a bit logic. You either are perfect or you are not. And if you're not, then it's not good enough. That's the whole reason, okay, that's the whole reason that one accepts Christ into one's life. That's the whole reason for Christ's sacrifice, because people are not perfect. If it causes a greater evil for me to not practice, for example, then I've got a decision to make as to whether I do or don't. You know, generally speaking, I don't. I have to be honest. And generally speaking, I don't think I would want to outside of a committed relationship. What I have to decide, very, very shortly really, is whether I want to go looking for a specific relationship or not. You know, I did at one point in time, and that stopped when I moved from London, and I've seen it from both sides. I've seen it from, you know, being immersed in the homosexual scene to being on a devout, you know, Southern Baptist forum where it's wrong to even feel homosexual, let alone do any homosexual actions. So I've been at it from both angles, and now that I'm out of that, I now have to decide what I actually believe for myself, rather than sort of just copying whichever sort of group I'm with at the time. That is something that I sort of need to do, and something that I need to focus on as well. So, you know, I don't know how long that's going to take, but it is something that I need to start to get sorted once and for all.